The story of Shadow Generations is not good. To make the claim that Shadow got over his past would just be a ridiculous misunderstanding of that story. I fully expected this to be a complete, long, and varied narrative that greatly exceeds generation in length and depth. If you are one of the people that says Shadow hates or even dislikes humanity, you are literally saying this game does not confirm anything at all. The only thing that matters in this game is Shadow versus Black Doom. Don't believe that Ian Flynn is to blame for most major blunders. Ridiculously tacky Ian Flynn writing in all its glory. This is incorrect. This game is missing so much information, and that's not how you want a story to be. This was not the game to tell this story. The story required Shadow's own game, not a DLC attached to another game that already was only allowed to take up minimal space itself. What is happening, emos and cosplayers? My name is KotyTang. Alright, so after playing this game, it's become evident that Shadow the Hedgehog is never actually trying to hurt Sonic. At this point, it's incredibly obvious Shadow is insanely stronger than him. Seeing the ways that Shadow takes down all of these villains, it just proves once and for all that he's one of the top 3 strongest characters in this entire franchise. I've been revising this script for a long time, so I'm ready to finally get into the specifics of the story and break down just how this thing was written, where it succeeded, and where it failed. The game may be only 4 hours long, but we still have plenty to discuss here. I'm going to assume you've all in some way experienced the game for yourselves and know what I'm talking about, or maybe you just want a whole bunch of spoilers. That's okay too. If you're new to my channel, I consider myself a student of writing. I've studied writing for the vast majority of my life, and since that's kind of what I specialize in, that's what my channel is dedicated to talking about. So, get ready to learn and take part in the end of an era as we analyze Shadow's final goodbye to Maria and Gerald. To be completely transparent before I even start, this is a very straightforward story, as there isn't any deviation from the main path. There are no additional narratives to follow, nor are there really any other plot lines being explored for these characters. The only thing that matters in this game is Shadow versus Black Doom. There is enough here to tell a story, and Shadow will be developing as a character, but he'll be the only character in the entire game to get really any significant attention. While of course we do finally get a full understanding of Gerald and Maria's characters, Maria and Gerald barely even matter here. There are scenes that give an implication of importance, but that doesn't mean that they actually lead to anything. These implications only matter in regards to previous games, which we'll get into. So, let's begin. Gunn has called Shadow to investigate a biosignature aboard the Ark. He spots an anomaly that's revealed to be Black Doom. Shadow gets pulled into white space by the Time Eater, but not before he finds the fake emerald from Sonic Adventure 2. So we have our reason for being here, we've set up the personality of our protagonist, we've directly linked the story to previous entries in the franchise, meaning at the very least you should experience Sonic Adventure 2, as well as Shadow 05, since the villain of this story is none other than Shadow's second father, Black Doom. You may even want to experience Sonic Generations first to understand the Time Eater. When Shadow gets to white space, the world minorly opens up and we see Omega. This is also the only cutscene with Omega. You do get to speak to him and others through optional dialogue, which doesn't feel so optional at times, as it will either provide key details to understanding the narrative, give insight on how each character currently feels, or the general thoughts they're having. In these optional dialogues, It's the only place that we learn how Omega got sucked into white space and that he's aware Sonic is fighting the Time Eater. Maria reveals the fact that she's apparently somehow watched Sonic and Shadow fight, even though they're in entirely separate white spaces, divided by a long-ass bridge. Gerald explains how Shadow shouldn't use his limiter rings at all anymore, or else he'll likely die. Omega is the first character to accurately name the black moon that floats in the middle of the hub world, and many more pretty significant details. We even get the implication that these characters are having consistent conversations throughout this game that we never experience. What we do learn helps to flesh out the narrative. And trust me, it needs things like this because this story is stunted. Moving on, at the center of white space is this large structure called the Black Moon. Inside the Black Moon is of course where Black Doom resides, but there's something more important than that. Every time Shadow battles Doom's Eye, Shadow is given some sort of emblem that's used to enhance Black Doom's powers, as well as Shadow's. We get 2 glimpses for the future within the first 2 levels of the game. Not only is the Black Moon a visual reminder at how close we are to approaching the finale, Shadow is temporarily given his final Doom power within the second act of Space Colony Arc. We also get some of the most heavy-handed foreshadowing with the constant appearance of Radical Highway, which will be the stage for the final battle against Black Doom, if you couldn't guess that from it appearing at least once in about every single time space. Shadow meets even more characters and deals with Black Doom until he finally comes face to face with Maria and Gerald. Shadow realizes that the two are from a time before the Ark was attacked by Gun, and the only thing that's certain is that they know Shadow very well already. Now, logically speaking, there must be a Shadow that in some way witnessed Gerald and Maria get forcefully pulled away by the Time Eater, only for them to come back a second later, having experienced several days in white space. Kinda like the hyperbolic time chamber in some ways. Anyway, Shadow's motivation from this point forward is implied to be making sure Gerald and Maria's fates are changed. This is one of 2 times in the entire story that Shadow ever displays that he's looking for a way to keep these 2 with him. The next time will be when they're literally fading away already. So Shadow is given this secondary goal that he never even follows through on, which is why I say this game's only story is just Shadow defeating Black Doom and getting out of white space. There are no further implications in the story beats that fit this direction of keeping Maria and Gerald here. Rouge and Gerald do optionally touch on this secondary goal for Shadow, however, it goes no further than that. I have to state this again. All of these optional dialogues can only add additional information to the plot. It can't influence it in any way, especially since you can entirely miss it. No instance in the story will ever be like, remember that time in the optional dialogue where I said this? Well, it's important now. That's not gonna happen. Ironically, the only reason Shadow would even know he's in a time space can only come from 2 instances. Either he learned this from Omega when he optionally tells him, or Shadow accurately figured it out on his own by the time he officially met Maria. Gerald does directly tell Shadow in another optional dialogue, but Shadow had already assumed this before Gerald even presented that information to him. This is not the only time the optional dialogue will break the narrative either. Moving on, Shadow is eventually retold by Gerald that he's a part of Black Doom. Gerald at this point does not realize that Shadow is only pretending to be their Shadow. Truly, it's Maria that learns that Black Doom and Shadow are connected by blood. This double-edged revelation of Shadow unintentionally giving Black Doom strength as he also grows in strength doesn't faze him regardless. Later on, Shadow meets up with and battles Sonic, where Shadow swaps his real emerald with the fake emerald. This is a narrative decision that was purely crafted for this scene and nothing else, as in order for Shadow to use Chaos Control, he requires an emerald. There is no other narrative context for why the fake emerald was aboard the Ark on a pedestal. It's also conveniently the exact emerald color that Shadow happens to have. Can you say massive contrivance? Rouge joins Shadow after this fight and agrees to give Sonic the real emerald later. When Black Doom meets Shadow again, there's a very odd narrative decision where Shadow pretends that he has no idea what Black Doom means when he says that he's learned from their last encounter. This is yet another instance of the optional dialogue breaking the narrative. Directly after the fight with Metal Sonic, there's an optional dialogue where Gerald deduces that Shadow is not the same Shadow that he knows, but instead he's one from the future. However, the scene we're currently at takes place much later, right after the fight with Methyllus. So really, there would be absolutely no reason that Shadow would still be pretending that he's not from a different moment in time, yet he continues to act like he's never met Black Doom before, to the point that Gerald has to explain that there must be a future Shadow who fought Black Doom. I don't understand the purpose for that. Both of these characters are aware they're from different times, yet Shadow continues pretending he's never met Black Doom before. So, is none of the optional dialogue actually happening then? Because that's a pretty substantial story confirmation before. But then it's entirely ignored. You can see how the optional dialogue becomes a problem. It can't influence the story, but if you try to make it influence the story, you can't actually reference it. Otherwise, someone could just watch this scene and be like, why the hell does Gerald know that Shadow's from the future now? The actual story never gave us the revelation that Gerald found out Shadow was from the future, which is why Shadow can continue pretending he's from the past. Regardless, Shadow officially breaks this facade out of pure anger, where he outright states that this time he'll crush every last one of the Black Arms, removing the chance that Black Doom will return. Although, in theory, Black Doom may still reside inside of Shadow, as he's still a spawn of the Black Arms. Thanks to Maria, Shadow is calmed down, and once Shadow has been given his final power, the fight with Black Doom begins. The Black Moon fully cracks open, transforming the white space into red space.
Green Hill's looking a lot more like Sand Hill right now.
This mirrors how Black Doom flooded the Earth with red clouds in Shadow 05. Black Doom now presents himself again and reveals that Shadow's finally been completed, referencing the Doom powers. Maria hurriedly runs to Shadow in fear of his new wings, but Shadow reassures Maria that he's letting go of the destructive anger he's held onto, and Shadow fully commits to the fact that everything he does will always be for her, citing the wish for everyone to have a chance to be happy. As we know, Maria has always wished for the people to be happy, so it's not new information that Shadow is delivering to her. Instead, what we actually have is that, in a way, this is Shadow inadvertently telling Maria she's either gonna die or he's gonna leave her. With a smile from Shadow, he goes to face one of his most powerful foes alone. After defeating Black Doom, the white space begins to fall apart. Rouge goes off to swap the fake emerald with the real one for Sonic. Meanwhile, Shadow returns to Gerald and Maria, who begin to disappear since time is fixing itself. Shadow suddenly shifts back to wanting to find a way to make the two stay. This is a very significant scene for anybody following Shadow's story from the beginning. This is the true moment of him leaving behind his past. When before, in Shadow 05, it was simply him ignoring it and deciding to look forward, the true test of his resolve is presented to him. He has to make this decision. He cannot choose to find a way to keep Gerald and Maria there. Thanks to some choice words by Maria, Shadow accepts their fate, knowing that when they return to the Ark, both of them will die and be gone forever. In the end, Shadow sheds one final tear as he runs off to meet up with Sonic with Rouge, and the game ends. Wait, that's it? Where's my song? My dark beginning song? How am I supposed to enjoy my Shadow without my song? Thanks to the amount of context we have from the previous games, the ending of this game is one of the most heart-wrenching scenes in the entire franchise of Sonic the Hedgehog. But it's not sad because of anything that happens in the game. In fact, if this game was all we ever had of Shadow, this scene would fall so flat that it would just come off as blatant tear bait. But we've had so much time with Shadow in previous games that this scene is unintentionally earned. but only by the merits of its predecessors. And that's not how you want a story to be. You want the current story to capitalize on what's been presented and conclude it in a satisfying way overall. You want to be able to build a powerful connection throughout and make the audience care about these characters through the story you're watching itself. You can, of course, use what's been built upon in previous entries, but your story should be able to stand on its own as well. Shadow Generations completely forgets to build a believable connection with Maria and Gerald for Shadow. All we get from them are a succession of plot points. Neither Maria nor Gerald get time to be fully realized as characters. Neither of them go through any sort of struggle or character arc. The only time they get to have a back and forth conversation with Shadow is when we're progressing the plot. And it's not a casual conversation like the optional dialogue, it's always dire, important information. Every single instance of anything story related just always falls back to Shadow. Maria and Gerald are characters purely designed for exposition and nothing else. That approach may have worked in the previous games, however, now that we're staring at them face to face for the very first time, Shadow Generations is completely incapable of utilizing them. The game doesn't even try to use Rouge or Omega in the narrative either, so I guess it's really not surprising. This game's entire story is as if a team of writers spent a whole year of just straight world building and then wrote the story in a day, and they just kind of assumed that you would just understand everything without having to show why any of it matters. So that's a quick breakdown of how the story's written, but there's so much more to discuss. And for the first part, you know we gotta keep it positive and fun before I inevitably have to talk about the problems again. Let's go! It's the very first time Shadow sees Maria for real, and he brushes it off, thinking that it couldn't possibly be real, he's just seeing things. This introduction to white space is excellent. If you had no idea what this game had in store for you, there's no better way than to tease Shadow and Maria meeting once more. But let's be honest, Shadow definitely could not see Maria from all the way over there, and there was no way she saw him either. I can't even see where she is on screen. She disappears after the initial zoom out. What are they seeing? The time-shifting abilities of Black Doom are on full display for the very first time, and he chooses none other than the start of Shadow's journey in the modern day, Radical Highway. As Sonic Adventure 2 is considered by many to be the greatest Sonic game of all time, it's fitting that in a game based around celebrating the franchise, we put this level in particular on a pedestal in the Sonic and Shadow Hall of Fame. It's hilarious that Black Doom consistently chose that stage every time. It makes sense though. If Black Doom is in control of this entire space, then of course when he decides to mess with it directly, it would transform into Radical Highway, the place that he's actually at. It unintentionally becomes an icon of this game. The Doom powers are a staple of this game that openly sets Shadow apart from everyone else. Although these Doom powers are fleeting, seeing the true scope of what Shadow was destined to become serves as a reminder that you actually shouldn't be playing with him too much. A lot of Shadow's strength comes from the fact that he's the spawn of a horrific, parasitical, hive-minded alien race that loosely resemble fantastical depictions of demonic beings. All of the bosses are seriously just so good. From the rematch against the Bio Lizard, the prototype to Shadow, the 1v1 with Metal Overlord, the ultimate Sonic, the return of Mephiles with his constant whining about being forgotten and wanting to exist during the battle, ending it all with Devil Doom, this time against Shadow's fully realized birthright. It truly is a celebration of everything Shadow related. Many Sonic characters would be hard pressed to have as many icons coming to bat like Sonic and Shadow do. These two hedgehogs truly are two sides of the same coin. is definitively the best this shot has ever looked across the entirety of Sonic media. It'll be hard for this franchise to ever possibly top this recreation. We'd have to take another artistic leap just to achieve something on this level of perfection. The fight that would follow the cross is of course an iconic moment itself that slightly displays the abilities of these two hedgehogs. And although Shadow would ultimately end up forfeiting the fight, seeing these two in action is always an event to talk about. There's a very nice visual in this scene with Shadow and Maria, where the screen is almost completely overtaken by the black fog. Maria's words manage to not only calm Shadow down, but prevent the screen from completely blacking out. Symbolically, as Maria tells Shadow to stand in the light, the shadows surrounding the screen are overtaken. Maria pretty much quotes verbatim the Japanese Sonic Channel short comic where Maria names Shadow. While those who heavily follow the Japanese side of the fandom, you probably wouldn't appreciate this scene as much. However, for Western media, it's a major thing that many people likely had no clue about. It reveals to everybody that Maria is the one who officially named Shadow. His entire name is also symbolic of his character even, something that I'm going to wrap back around on later. Shadow relaying his wish to Maria and reassuring her that everything will be alright, as he states that he will continue to fight outside of the means for revenge and malice. It's a rare thing that Shadow smiles, and it's even more rare that it's a sincere, heartfelt smile. If there ever was a time to make Shadow smile like this, it would be when speaking to Maria. This scene alone will have put Shadow Generations on the map for the simple fact that one of the most tragic characters in this entire franchise actually was delivering a moment of genuine happiness and comfort. Ian Flynn did something that I have to praise him for. He went against his traditional copycat, lowbrow, trashy, circle jerk, hey I got that reference writing style. At the end of the fight with Devil Doom, instead of Shadow saying, "This is who I am," which was the quote that Shadow would proclaim during the ending of every path in Shadow 05, Ian instead makes his own quote, giving Shadow the words, "This is the destiny I choose." In relation to how Ian usually writes, this is a perfect subversion to claim this story as his own. I want more of that from Ian Flynn. That way he can properly claim this scene as something that he did. From this perfect line delivery by Kirk Thornton, but you don't know what's going to happen, to every word spoken during Maria's final scene, ending it all with a single tear from Shadow that splashes onto Rouge's cheek. It's hard to make a true final send-off for a character, but Ian Flynn manages to do everything right and then some. Thanks to the context of every game before it, this scene was written just about as good as it needed to be. Where it fumbles is only the build-up to it. The scene itself is great. There's of course going to be some other moments that I could add on here, and there's likely moments that you guys may feel deserve to be called iconic. I think that these are the most significant things about this game that will be remembered for years after. If you guys have any moments that you absolutely loved, be sure to put them in the comments below. But no worries! That's not all there is to the game. There's also... I don't want to get too deep into this, as this would require a video all on its own. I did love reading this journal. The journal confirms and details quite a bit about the lore. A major thing is that it confirms Gerald did indeed go to Angel Island, all by himself in fact. It also confirms that he obtained knowledge about perfect chaos, which would ultimately fuel his research into different life forms, as well as the ultimate life form. So it's nice to finally have that theory officially canonized. It's a great read and gives a bunch of insight on who Gerald and Maria were, as well as detailing the type of research involved on the Ark before and after Shadow was created. It even ends with the same entry Rouge reads in Sonic Adventure 2. Eggman's father has been revealed, as well as Eggman's uncle, and Maria's father. Maria also apparently has a baby sister. I do have to wonder how she's doing these days. Actually, how are all of the Robotniks doing these days? Are all of the Robotniks, like, upset about Eggman? Everybody in his family seems to be either an incredibly smart person, or they're simply capable of incredible feats in different sciences. Maybe one day Eggman will meet his match in another Robotnik. Since Adventure 2's mural theory has officially been canonized, I think that we also just fully confirmed that the mural of Sonic 3 and Knuckles never existed. There isn't even an implication that it does, in fact. In Gerald's journal, the Master Emerald Shrine is shown to be exactly as it is in Sonic Adventure. Gerald would have went to Angel Island 50 years or more before 3 and Knuckles. The Emerald Shrine should be deep inside of the island in a hidden palace, if the lore from 3 and Knuckles is to be followed. So, I think it's safe to say, this mural isn't canon. This makes me wonder, what else in the classic series is no longer considered canon? Abraham Towers is confirmed to have been a happy accident, meaning his parents were both scientists aboard the Ark. Once again confirming that he and Maria were the only children up there. Yet, still not confirming how the hell Abraham survived the execution of every single person on the Ark. Interestingly, while Gerald notes Abraham was a happy accident, Maria seems to think that he was brought up there after the fact, which evidently is not true. Gerald probably doesn't want to explain what a happy accident is. There are themes in the game, however, there doesn't seem to be a theme. What most people would come to the conclusion for the theme of the story is something like, don't dwell on the past, or pain from the past may come unexpectedly. Something along those lines, due to the fact that Gerald and Maria are in the story. However, that's clearly not what the message is here, as the story never explores that element, except for twice. Generally, in a story, we can pick up the message the author wants to deliver based on the context of the story itself, as well as listening to the ideas most often brought up and enacted. Not every author does have a theme in mind, but the best theme that I can truly find for you in this game is, let the past die, or something to that effect. Shadow constantly battles with everything he's been to up to this point in his life. He constantly suppresses who he used to be, or what he was supposed to be, until ultimately, he literally allows Maria and Gerald to die, as well as finally killing Black Doom, the final modern day connection to his past. So, let the past die seems to be the actual theme, intentional or not. Instead of that boring conversation, I actually wanted to get into the religious theming of Shadow, as it's always a very fascinating detail to me. Shadow's stories are no stranger to various biblical events, themes, and characters. I won't be going into all of the religious symbolism in Shadow's stories, but there's a few in particular that stood out to me for this game. Starting with the Black Moon, Black Doom seemingly creates a being resembling an ophonym, or alternatively, referred to as thrones. One of the 4 living wheels of God's chariot. What I find particularly interesting is that Black Doom is guarded by this specific angel. The Ophonim are among the highest beings closest to God, and not only does the Black Moon prevent Shadow from meeting Black Doom, but the fact that the Ophonim are also referred to as thrones would mean that Shadow essentially has to pass through one of God's most powerful angels in order to enter the throne of God, which, in this case, God would be Black Doom. Black Doom at one point states that he will claim Shadow's mind, body, and soul, a claim often attributed to Satan himself, where he can do just that to all of those who stray too far from God. Black Doom is probably as close to Satan as you're ever gonna get in the Sonic universe, so the idea itself perfectly fits right in there. As I said before, Shadow's name is symbolic. He is essentially an inverted Satan, specifically when Satan was called Lucifer, or Bearer of Light. This is backed up by Maria's words especially about how she came to name Shadow. You could see the opposite of Lucifer to be Jesus, or, of course, God. And if we mix this with the recap of Shadow in the beginning of the game, where it states that he's a judge of humans, Shadow is also a form of God in his own right, making it even more fitting that Shadow would be the one to take down Space Satan. Shadow truly is caught between light and darkness. There's also a scene where Gerald states that he made a Faustian deal with Black Doom, and now everyone must pay for his sins. If you're unfamiliar, Faust is a character in a German folktale based on the real person of a similar name. An interesting parallel between Faust and Gerald is that Faust makes a deal with the devil in order to obtain unlimited knowledge and worldly pleasures. In this case, that unlimited knowledge would be the ultimate life form. In early versions of the folktale, Faust became corrupted and would subsequently be forced into hell. So, mirroring the story of Faust, Gerald is corrupted by the sins of his own actions, stemming from this deal with Black Doom, where his entire world eventually comes crumbling down around him, landing him in the closest thing that he would consider hell, being forcefully stripped away from everything he's ever worked on, and the death of Maria. There's just a lot of religious symbolism littered through Shadow's life to go over. I think it's a big reason behind why so many are naturally drawn to the character, even without realizing it. I just feel this needs to be said. I don't believe that Ian Flynn is to blame for most major blunders that I will be going over in this story. If you have any problems with the story, I suggest you divert all of your attention to Sega and Sonic Team. I'm not a big fan of Ian's track record for writing, but I will defend him when he should be. Sega approved and denied everything that went into this game, and I think that it's incredibly evident that they gave Ian a very short window to actually write this story to. This isn't like IDW, where Sega kind of barely brushes over what's going on. This is their mainline series. Not only that, Shadow Generations has been marketed better than any other Sonic game has ever been marketed. I think it probably even has one of the largest budgets for a Sonic game. That alone absolves Ian of a lot. This is a Sonic game that Sonic Team and Sega have all of their work written all over it. It's very clear that they heavily looked over everything that was going on and meticulously made sure that everything was to their liking. That's not to say that the story is without Ian Flynn's own writing trademarks. We will be getting into one of those, like when I talk about Sonic and Shadow's initial conversation. Things like that should still absolutely be heavily criticized. What I want you all to understand is that Shadow Generations is a product that Sonic Team would have personally scoured for anything they don't like and immediately toss it into a fire if it didn't match with the type of mainline game they wanted. I completed the game in about 3 to 4 hours. That is not enough time to tell the tale that Ian evidently wanted. Most of that time is going to be taken up by gameplay. At best, Ian got 40 to 50 minutes of story, which means he had 1 episode's worth of storytelling to try and fully fulfill these character arcs for Shadow. That's no small order. You're basically telling him to make a miracle happen with that time frame. I can relate to Ian and see the vision that he was going for. Dark Beginnings was a good watch. There's an entire journal handmade by Evan Stanley that further details even more secrets and lore updates. There was a lot of behind the scenes setup happening here. Shadow Generations had a pretty large cast of characters, but Ian couldn't properly use any of them. He only ended up being able to use Doom, Shadow, Maria, and Gerald. Rouge was lucky to get a couple scenes to herself, and Sonic was lucky to even have a cutscene at all. That's not even how Shadow and Sonic's fight happened in the original generations. I don't know what the hell Big the Cat was doing here though. We genuinely didn't need that. I sympathize with Ian Flynn heavily because I can feel the desire to expand on everything presented in this game. But he was just simply so restricted in how long this story could be, and I think that's disgusting for Sega to have done to him. This should have been a sequel to Sonic Generations, not Sonic Generations with Shadow DLC tacked on.
Be sure to leave a like if you've been enjoying the video. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment below about what you think of Shadow Generations. Now back to the video.
Alright, what's a KotyTang video without pointing out a bunch of things done wrong? If you've seen my previous video on Dark Beginnings, you know about my Black Doom theories. One where I hypothesized that the larva on the Ark that Shadow and Maria talked in front of eventually became Black Doom. Another where I state that Shadow has already been pulled into white space before Dark Beginnings even begins and is already reliving his timeline. And a final one where I theorize that Black Doom may just be growing from Shadow. This game didn't confirm a single one of those theories. Not because it debunked any of them. In fact, quite the opposite. This game does not confirm anything at all. We don't ever learn how Black Doom came back, and why he has time powers. Especially not why he even has those time powers before we're even in white space, or even when we are in white space for that matter. Why is he able to bend time and space to his will? We could speculate all day. The fact is, the game never even attempts to give a hint for how it's possible. Eggman had to personally control the Time Eater. Are we trying to say the Time Eater just casually hands out deals to whoever asks? Is Eggman aware that Black Doom is even here? Black Doom even controls a section of white space all his own, so much so to the point that once he's killed, it all begins to collapse and revert all of the time anomalies to normal. These are questions that never get answered, ever. Gerald does state that Black Doom has grown a new body though, and that's the only saving grace to one of my theories. I can only use conjecture here to try and confirm that the larva from the Ark ended up becoming Black Doom, and that's the entire reason he was on the Ark in the beginning of the game. But conjecture isn't a fact, it's just a theory. First, let me just say, it's nice to know that they're taking sound cues from Sonic Adventure 2 with the unnecessarily loud music in the background.
Alongside Gerald's ailing granddaughter, Maria. They were inseparable.
I also don't like the music choice here. I don't think it fits at all. The recap messes with information that's pretty important if people don't really know Shadow. The first misconception is that Gunn took the lives of both Maria and Gerald and then sealed Shadow away all at once. This is incorrect. What actually happened is that Gunn killed everybody still aboard the Ark except for Gerald. And for some reason, Abraham Towers, later known as the Gun Commander. That's never been explained either. Abraham just lived for whatever reason. Shadow was captured after this massacre when his escape pod landed on Earth. The second inconsistency is claiming that Shadow was attempting to get revenge purely for Maria and planned to destroy the world, which again is only half true. The only reason Shadow wanted revenge to such an extreme degree was because those were thoughts and feelings implanted into him by Gerald. Instead of Gunn killing Professor Gerald on the Ark, he would actually be forced to continue working on Shadow. While doing this, he would secretly be creating the plot to destroy all of humanity, reworking Shadow's memories to only focus on getting revenge for Maria. Gerald also somehow programmed the Bio-Lizard to hurtle the Ark into Earth, And then, when Project Shadow was allegedly finished, Shadow would be locked away, and Professor Gerald was executed by a firing squad. This is literally the story of Sonic Adventure 2, and they just glossed right over this. The recap also states that because Shadow remembered Maria's wish to protect the planet and the people who live upon it, this is actually what snapped Shadow out of his need for vengeance. In actuality, it's what snapped him out of Gerald's programming and returned him to the actual Shadow. It's really annoying to see his character presented this way, because it's just leaving out major context in what's supposed to be a recap. In reality, very few people who are just experiencing Sonic for the first time are really going to want to go back to a 2001 game. Especially one as mid as Sonic Adventure 2. The only good stages are Sonic and Shadow. Big stretch. Just had to get that one out of there. Was the goal of this recap to not make Gerald seem like an insane psychopath for this game or something? I mean, that literally was what he became. If this game convinces people to somehow go back to Sonic Adventure 2, they're even gonna see this man get executed. I suppose this level of dumbing down was evident in this gun soldier not having their gun out, even though there is still a loud crack of the bullet and a dead 12-year-old girl on the ground. This was not really an inconsistency, it's just interesting. There's a bit where Sonic Team titles Shadow the lone dark warrior who judges the world by his own code. It also specifies that the agreement between Shadow and Maria is in fact both the world and the people together. It's interesting because a common debate in the Sonic community is that Shadow absolutely hates all of humanity. So to hear that Sonic Team sees him as essentially the judge and jury of these people could be seen as a pretty explosive claim. Not for me though. I know that Shadow doesn't hate all of humanity, he's just less trusting of humanity. In truth, what you'll gather from following Shadow's story is that he actually just hides behind a stone-cold exterior that he refuses to let go. But deep down, he's a truly heroic person that both Gerald and Maria expose consistently and explain in great detail that a beacon of hope for humanity is what he was literally made for. This is a constant thing said over and over and over throughout the franchise. It's even confirmed that Gerald created Shadow to have a kind heart at his core, one that was purposely designed to match Maria's. And whenever Shadow and Maria interact, Maria accurately sees right through Shadow's standoffish facade and constantly calls him out on it.
You have a big heart. It may be difficult for you to express it, but I know that deep down you really do care. About me. About everyone.
Anybody arguing that Shadow doesn't care about people and doesn't have this kind heart is grossly misunderstanding the character. He's standoffish. His actual feelings are hidden behind those layers. Shadow will never outright say he cares about humanity, but all of his actions prove that he truly does. A great example is even in this game. Initially, when Maria is running from the Black Arms, Shadow actually doesn't know that's Maria. He just thinks it's a person, so he goes and saves them. It's only after the fact that he realizes that he just saved Maria. If you are one of the people that says Shadow hates or even dislikes humanity, you are literally saying that Maria and Gerald are flat out lying or just straight up wrong whenever they talk about him or speak directly to Shadow, which is hilarious to me. That's the argument you're gonna have to battle with. If you want a deeper dive into Shadow's character, I suggest you head over to my review of Dark Beginnings Episode 2, where I fully explain Shadow's development into the character that he is today. It's never explained that Maria withstands her illness better in white space, but it absolutely must be the case, since she isn't affected by it even a single time in the game. It seems like it's just the fact that it's even more suppressed here than it is on even the Ark. She's running for her life from the Black Arms and is still completely fine afterward. In Dark Beginnings, she collapses from running too fast and then getting too excited. So now imagine Maria alone on the Ark, running for her life. She'd collapse before she even made it out of the room. Now this begs the question, can anybody truly die in white space? I mean, it must be so since Black Doom dies, but if time doesn't pass, how would a body deteriorate? And could a soul even pass on? Also, where did the aliens come from? Is the implication supposed to be that white space is actually crawling with these guys? Did Black Doom purposely send them to chase Maria? What scenario could have possibly happened that allowed Maria to ever be alone? Did Gerald ditch her ass when the Black Arm showed up? Shadow randomly forgets about Black Doom out of nowhere. Shadow asks Gerald what Black Doom means by their last encounter. This is either a complete failure to remember the story of Shadow 05, a failed implication that Black Doom will return in a future game, or it's Shadow for some reason pretending that he's still 50 years ago Shadow, when Gerald and Maria already found out he was from the future. Quite a few aspects of this game's story are either undercooked or flat out ignored. This is more so an issue because it's following a similar layout to Sonic Generations, which already had an extremely short and lackluster story itself. While we do have a solid track of marketing and even a full 15-minute animation to set everything up, the in-game story still fails to meet my expectations for what was being conjured up in preparation for the game itself. With all of this additional material, even Gerald's journal, I fully expected this to be a complete, long, and varied narrative that greatly exceeds Generation in length and depth. At the very least, I can say that Shadow Generations does indeed have more depth than whatever Generations even attempted to present, and the presentation is better than anything this franchise has ever had for the games, and as I said in my Dream Team review, I'm going to be upholding these games to a certain standard that matches that mobile game's animation. Just like I said in that video, this franchise should either match or exceed the animation presented in that mobile game. And Shadow Generations successfully exceeds Dream Team in animation quality. But this isn't about me generalizing the entire game. Let's talk about the specific blunders this game actually did. You have to understand, Shadow never explicitly learns that he's trapped in time from the cutscenes in the story. Shadow actually learns this information through optional dialogue with Omega. There's quite a few things that we only gather through these optional dialogue strings, in fact. Because I guess the game couldn't be bothered with major plot details, they just made them all optional dialogue. I say all loosely, because you're still not gonna learn what is happening in the story through them. There's even a scene where Rouge tells Shadow that he can always come to her if anything's bothering him. There are so many things you can learn about these characters and the actual narrative that by not speaking to them periodically, you could just completely miss them. And they didn't even bother to voice these lines either. It truly is the minimum amount of effort put into all of these optional dialogues. So many of these things written in these interactions seem to be things the writers wanted to incorporate into a cutscene, but just weren't allowed to. Sonic Frontiers simply did this a trillion times better. In Frontiers, the dialogues had fully voiced lines, focus shots on whoever is talking, and actual interactions between Sonic and whoever he was speaking to. Even the DLC did this when you play as Amy, Tails, and Knuckles. Now instead of just Sonic speaking to his friends, it's Knuckles speaking to Tails, or Tails speaking to Amy. The characters would even be found in random places throughout the level to give even more dialogue. Frontiers would sometimes even have specific landscape shots to influence something the characters were talking about. Yes, in both cases the optional dialogue can't actually influence the plot, but in comparison to Shadow Generations, which gives you nothing but a text box, and if you're lucky, a throwaway one-liner for the characters, if not just a grunt. It just shows that Sonic Frontiers is vastly superior in how they handled character interactions. You actually learn more things. It expands the narrative. It fleshes it out. In Frontiers, we actually get to experience the story with the characters as we go across what they're feeling and what they're thinking. Thoughts that don't even always have to be directly related to the narrative. It's just what the character actually is feeling and thinking about at the time. And then they have a dialogue about it. Shadow Generations kind of tries to do that. I mean, Shadow never responds to anybody at all. They just kind of pretend they're having a conversation with him as he blankly stares back at them. The optional dialogue in Shadow Generations is an afterthought. Now, when we first see Shadow, he claims that Gunn found an unusual biosignature aboard the Ark, which is a massive contradiction to how Dark Beginnings displayed how Shadow arrived. According to the prologue designed for this game, Gunn did not tell Shadow to go up to the Ark. They weren't even involved in the discovery of Black Doom. It was actually entirely Shadow himself that brought him to the Ark. Surprisingly, thanks to a nightmare he was having, one that he simply decided to act on, so he went to the Ark. Rouge and Gunn were in Dark Beginnings, however Gunn was only searching for the Time Eater, specifically at Eggman's bases. The Space Colony Ark wasn't even a part of the equation. In this game, Shadow realizes that he was tracking Black Doom all along, which is, once again, the entire reason that Shadow went up to the Ark in Dark Beginnings. According to the prologue, he always knew he was going to find Black Doom up there. That's why he went up there. In this game, it's confirmed that Shadow had no idea that he was tracking Black Doom at all.
So what I was tracking was him. I won't let him escape again.
So now we have this oddity, the fake Chaos Emerald. Originally, this emerald was actually used to stop the Eclipse Cannon from firing. There's a lot that you could assume happened with the fake emerald, but one thing is for certain. The last time we saw it, it was noted to have been jammed into the Eclipse Cannon's console with the other Chaos Emeralds. And then we never saw it again. There's really no reason for the fake emerald to now be sitting on a pedestal in the middle of a random room as though it's some kind of museum attraction. Now, of course, it's possible that Black Doom placed it there with, his ability to apparently just control the natural state of the world around him at any moment, outside of white space, I guess. I mean, it's convenient for Shadow later on in the story, of course. Even more convenient, it's the same color as the emerald he happens to be holding. As I said before, it's a glaringly obvious, massive contrivance. It's never explained what these tokens that Shadow collects after battling Black Doom are. Shadow just magically collects this gameplay MacGuffin in the story. And as he's collecting this obvious gameplay element, we're just supposed to apparently accept that it powers up both him and Black Doom. And also cracks this moon and opens up white space. In a purely gameplay perspective, I mean, sure, why not? In a storytelling perspective, what the hell are these things? This scene comes completely out of nowhere. This is how it goes down, okay? You finish Chaos Island, and Shadow is just magically transported in front of City Escape with absolutely no explanation at all. After Shadow fights Sonic, Rouge randomly shows up too, and then Shadow and Rouge just both magically appear back in front of Chaos Island. What the f*** is happening? There is absolutely no logical reasoning given for why any of that just happened. Even the final scene of this game just adds more fuel to the growing fire of what the f***s. Shadow has to travel a long-ass road to get back to Sonic. Why in the f*** did he just randomly appear in front of City Escape? Mephiles the Dark is completely wasted. Shadow may not remember Mephiles, which is a very nice detail. However, this is yet another problem with this entire story only lasting about a little under an hour in watch time. Even in Sonic's case, classic Eggman was ripped right out of his timeline and ended up being a part of Sonic Generations' story. Metal Sonic and Mephiles both have autonomy. The fact that they're just trapped in these little spaces and can't get out is kind of silly. They would also have plans against Shadow or Sonic or whoever else they're going against. Putting Perfect Chaos and the Bio Lizard, okay, those make sense. Eggman with his Egg Dragoon, and then of course classic Eggman with the Death Egg Robot. They all had autonomy, so of course they can be involved in the story. As Shadow Generations is, there truly is no time to develop and flesh out these characters in any sort of meaningful way. Mephiles is a time god. He is in his domain while we're in white space. It's surprising that Black Doom was the villain they chose to represent this game. This just adds even more ammo to the fact that this entire story was wasted. The main villain of Shadow Generations either should have been Mephiles, or Mephiles shouldn't have even made an appearance at all. It just comes off as a massive misunderstanding of Mephiles' character. Let me say this again. He's one piece of a literal god. There's even a very confusing question to ask about Mephiles versus the Time Eater. And it even wraps back around to how the hell Black Doom has time powers, especially time powers more powerful than Mephiles. I said it once, I'll say it again. This game is missing so much information. The fact that this game wasn't made as a sequel to Sonic Generations is a blunder in its own right. Dude, Black Doom doesn't even need the Time Eater to return. There are so many avenues that Sega could have gone down to bring him back. In this game, Black Doom has created this brand new alien called the Black Moon. If he's capable of creating entirely new alien types, then he should also be able to create some sort of body-snatching alien or life-stealing alien to recreate his army off of. Maria, Gerald, and Shadow. The trio that fans of Shadow have wanted to see together since day one of getting to know the character. All squandered in what might as well be considered a long-standing story that got cancelled right when they were about to renew the season, so they had to wrap up the plot quickly. We get exactly 5 cutscenes with Maria and Shadow together, and in only 2 of them does Shadow contemplate this desire to keep Maria there, with the second time being when she's already in the middle of fading away. Initially, it's presented as the major motivation for everything Shadow's about to do next. So for Shadow to never address this dilemma again is just such a massive waste of story potential. In the grand scheme of the narrative, Maria and Gerald are just tools for exposition. I have a lot to say about this, but not just yet. Let's move on to some other blunders first. I think it's goofy to note that unlike Big the Cat, who gets a short cutscene and dialogue towards Shadow, one of the closest people to Shadow doesn't get any focus in the first exchange with him. Omega also does not take on any meaningful role in the story, nor does Rouge. Rouge and Omega literally just exist in this world. At the very least, Rouge gives the real emerald to Sonic after everything is all said and done, but are you really gonna say she had a huge impact in the story? They could have just written it to where Shadow speeds to Sonic and gives him the real emerald regardless. I mean, they changed the entire context of Shadow and Sonic's fight initially. It genuinely doesn't matter. There is no cutscene in Sonic Generations where this fake emerald is even implied to exist, nor is there a scene where Rouge somehow swaps it. We're just supposed to believe that she did it. Omega and Rouge play absolutely no role in the story. They just stand around in their areas for the entire game. There is no scene with Rouge talking to Gerald and Maria, nor is there even a scene where Rouge talks to Omega. None of the other characters even interact with Black Doom a single time in the story. it's only Gerald and Maria that get to. Orbot and Cubot are also here. They don't do anything in the whole story. This is the most in-place Big has ever been, and simultaneously the most out of place he's ever been. And then Rouge goes back to Sonic with Shadow when the game ends. But what happened to Omega? What happened to Orbot and Cubot? Or even Big? They stayed in that white space. Did they fade away like Maria and Gerald? Are they okay?
I found you, Shadow.
The blue hedgehog. Of all places.
You have something I need.
You can wait until my business is finished.
Yeah, sorry, but that Chaos Emerald and I have a date with a monster.
Well then, it'll be a date to die for.
Ridiculously tacky Ian Flynn writing in all its glory. These things really shouldn't be allowed outside of the writing room. I always just imagine Ian pretentiously patting himself on his back at how incredible of a job that he thinks he did after flinging this type of writing out into the ether. It's not clever. Let's just call it what it is. It's stupid and lazy as hell. Please stop being a modern day Disney copycat where you just piggyback off the work of other more successful writers. How about instead of doing this, you create your own iconic scenes with your own creative dialogue? This scene immediately loses the ability to be an iconic exchange because it isn't original at all. The fight that follows is cool, but it's sullied by this exchange between Sonic and Shadow that starts it off. Instead of writers like Ian Flynn doing this whack-ass nostalgia brain rot shit, how about we make new iconic moments? I don't give a single shit about anything you love about Ian Flynn or the IDW team. You have to admit, these guys need to stop doing this. Please, please, please make something new and iconic that we can all remember and constantly think back on. Stop rehashing shit we've already seen. This is actually something that the entire IDW team thinks is a really cool writing style. Yet they're fully aware that it's always a controversial aspect, as not only do people forcefully lose several IQ points, but so many people also lose respect for the writing through these so blatant in-your-face references. It will never stop being a problem until they stop doing it. And since Ian has written every single Sonic story since Frontiers, we're sure as fuck not gonna be letting up on this tacky writing style anytime soon. And again, all of the IDW knows that so many people hate it. They just don't care. I understand the idea of callbacks in media. They can be cool. However, a good callback is very rarely the exact scene of the callback itself. The IDW team apparently just magically fall into always being able to copy the exact quotes from a callback 100% of the time. This Sonic and Shadow moment could have been absolutely iconic, but of course not. Why make new when you can just reuse the exact lines from writers that molded fan favorite scenes better than you? Just reference everybody's favorite moments verbatim and override the thought of it to you literally writing that scene 10 years later in the future. Remember how I said that Cross was a cool moment? That's a good callback. This is not. Dialogue is pretty different. What also makes this scene even worse than it already is the fact that Roger clearly knew the exact reference the writers were going for, yet Kirk had absolutely no clue. Roger delivers his lines similarly to how Ryan did.
I found you, Faker. I found you, Shadow.
But Kirk fails to match David's inflections with the lines entirely.
That blue hedgehog again, of all places. The blue hedgehog. Of all places.
Well then, it'll be a date to die for.
Well then, it'll be a date to die for.
I'll chalk this up to a sheer voice direction failure and a writer's room blunder. This scene seems to have been written as casual humor between Sonic and Shadow, but the scene was actually played entirely straight, which is why it's just stupid. finale to Shadow's past. I've said it a few times, but I'll say it again here. This should have been a sequel to Sonic Generations, not a Shadow DLC expansion for an already atrociously plotted out 2011 game. While of course in Shadow 05 we had Shadow throw away his past, but a true analysis of that story will show you that Shadow's arc in that game was him discovering himself and deciding what he should do with his life, not entirely getting over his past. To make the claim that Shadow got over his past would just be a ridiculous misunderstanding of that story. At the end of the game, Shadow only just found out about his past again, and now you're telling me that all the trauma just disappears because he said he's done with it? Yeah, f***ing right. At best, he was ignoring the past. But what do I know? Brushing all of your trauma under a rug is always going to be a great way to move on. Shadow Generations presents an arc that needed to be done by itself. It's such an important arc for Shadow, and it's rushed. It's the finale of everything he's been through so far. A once-in-a-lifetime chance to really give Shadow that closure, and yet barely even 2 scenes in the entire game were spent on it. As much as many fans of Shadow wanted Shadow to finally get closure with Gerald and Maria, this was not the story to use here. As far as I'm concerned, the final chapter to Shadow's arc has now been permanently wasted. It's so evident that the writers simply could not give the full scope of story that they truly wanted. Yes, there is optional dialogue that opens up the story a bit. Rouge and Gerald have dialogues that attempt to touch on this narrative for Shadow. Rouge states that she hopes Shadow doesn't fall back into his past and reminds him that he's moved on from that point in time, while Gerald tries to convince Shadow out of changing time. But we can't forget, in the grand scheme of the narrative, this dialogue is optional, and therefore worthless to pushing the actual story along. If you want this dialogue to mean something, then you need to force a dialogue onto the player after they complete these levels. You can't just make it a neat little afterthought. You have to. I repeat, you have to make this a part of the narrative that is forced onto the player to witness. Otherwise, it ultimately means nothing. Since it's optional dialogue, that means it's something that you can completely miss. And because it's something that you can completely miss, it renders both exchanges pointless to the actual narrative, as it doesn't affect the actions of Shadow in any form. And again, unlike in Frontiers, Shadow doesn't even respond to any of this. So the dialogue goes nowhere, even if we look at it as an optional storyline. Rouge and Gerald might as well be talking to the sky. There's quite a bit that does go on in these optional dialogues. Gerald has pretty much figured out that him and Maria are going to die at some point, and Shadow is going to be left alone in the future. Maria describes the upsetting specifics of her disease. Wouldn't it be crazy to hear how Shadow himself feels about all of these things? But nope. The story with Gerald and Maria attempts to use other games to give us a complete narrative while neglecting to use 2 of the most important characters in Shadow's life that we will never see in this manner again. That's why Casey Lee Williams' song for Dark Beginnings isn't even in the game. The game has nothing to do with the plotline of Maria and Gerald. This game only has space for Shadow versus Black Doom, and that's why this entire story was permanently squandered. The only way to give us this story back is to reset the entire franchise now. I don't like Kirk as Shadow. I've said it many times before, but I might as well add it in here. Kirk Thornton is definitively the worst casting choice for Shadow we've ever had so far. No future Shadow voice should ever try to match the voice that he gives to Shadow. I don't care if Kirk Thornton is the greatest actor of all time. Shadow wouldn't sound like this. But if you switch to the Terrio skin, it honestly is like Shadow is a brand new character. A new character with some fugly ass off-brand Knuckles quills. However, I actually would have no problem with Kirk voicing this character if they ever repurpose this concept skin of Shadow.
Time to sever this bond between us forever.
Character design is something that you have to take into consideration when selecting a voice actor. Terios actually looks like he could sound like Kirk, but Kirk as Shadow? No f***ing thank you. Shadow simply doesn't look like he'd sound that way. Ian Hanlon from Sonic Prime gave a pretty different voice for Shadow, but it still entirely fit him.
Sonic, I told you Nine couldn't be trusted. Whatever he's up to, it's causing this world to fracture. Pull yourself together. This mountain is decaying, and it's gonna take us with it. We have to run!
Sega needs to either recast Kirk Thornton or completely change the voice direction they've been giving him to match closer to something that Shadow would actually sound like based on how he looks. If Cindy Robinson can stop voicing Amy like Minnie Mouse...
You saved me, Sonic. I was afraid I'd never be able to flirt with you again. You saved me, Sonic. I'll be sure to return the favor next time around.
Then I believe that Kirk Thornton can stop making Shadow sound like Kisame Hoshigaki.
As good as you are, even you can't dodge all of these. No more mistakes. This time, I will crush every last one of them.
When Shadow talks, he sounds like he's an actual Saturday morning cartoon villain that's not meant to be taken seriously. Oh my god, that yell was ass! Speaking of design choices, in the concept artwork for Shadow, C1 and D1 of this concept would have been much better skins to adapt into DLC, and I wish they chose one of those instead. I've always thought that this buff boy Terios skin looked stupid, and the only thing cool about it is that he has a scar across his eye. C1 and D1 actually match with the black arms design that they would eventually go for in Shadow 05. So these two as DLC would have been extremely fitting. The four characters in the story are the only ones with any sense of purpose in development, so we'll just focus on Shadow, Maria, Gerald, and Black Doom. Shadow is Shadow again! For this game, at least. In terms of his story, Shadow's done. He's officially laid his troubled past to rest. He may have some lasting sadness, but ultimately, he got what he was robbed for of all those years ago. A chance to say goodbye to the two people that he loved with all of his heart. And he assumedly finally has defeated his secondary father. There's nothing left for Shadow except to move on. So, what's next for him? Personally, I think that Shadow's next long-standing arc should involve him discovering what he sees as the true nature of humanity. If he wants to protect this planet and its people, then I would say his stories need to begin with him finding out the various differences between those he considers evil and those he considers good. That way, Shadow can explore the world, similarly to Sonic, so he can go on his own adventures and experience a wide variety of cultures and types of people. And we can get off constantly treading Shadow's past. He can truly work toward the future he wants to see, battling against those he deems unworthy. Which will once again give Shadow a bunch of villains to work with. Although with how powerful Shadow is, I doubt that they'll be lasting very long. These villains will have to be, pretty freaking strong. We do learn quite a bit about Maria. Of course we know she has NIDS, but we get to see Maria on a more personal level. Although the game doesn't really present this in any sort of meaningful or memorable way, but through analyzing everything the story had to offer, this is the take of Maria that I've gathered. Maria seems to take from Gerald in her pursuit of science. While Gerald's sons may have split into their advances of science, Maria seems to obtain everything that Gerald loved about science. In a lot of ways, she really is his protege. Maria is interested in not only the technological, but the biological and the many wonders of the world. Especially the unknown, as she speaks about how fascinating she finds going into space, as well as the white space they're trapped in. Maria has done reports on the biology of Chow. She's designed Shadow's shoes as well as his limiter rings. She's learned how the Aurora Borealis works. She's an excitable person, very clingy and protective of Shadow, a bit hard-headed at times. She's also incredibly brave, standing up to not only her own disease, but also to Black Doom himself. She's quick to act without even thinking about the consequences or damage that it could potentially do to her own body. Although she's trapped in a very fragile body, she doesn't treat herself like a fragile person. With how pure-hearted and kind Maria was, she truly was a gift to the world, and before her life could even truly begin, she was robbed of everything she could have wanted. But she never let that get to her, as she always believed that she would one day return to Earth after Gerald finally cured her. Up until the very end of her life, she never gave up hope. She entrusted all of her dreams into Shadow. A 12-year-old girl who had just got shot by government military, still saying that there's plenty of good in the world and they deserve a chance to be happy. Maria also never resented people for being able to have more than her or living a normal life. She only wished to know as much as she possibly could for the day that she'd finally return to Earth a healthy woman. I believe entirely that Maria would have been a philanthropist had she ever got the chance to actually live out her life. It's evident in her every word, from how she talks about people, the world, to the love of everything around her, her desire to learn, and her incredible ability to read right through people's true nature, or, at the very least, somebody as closed off as Shadow. It's confirmed in this game that Maria did experience life on Earth temporarily. She had just enough to have fond memories of it, like a family trip to Spagonia. It's just unfortunate that her tail was ripped to shreds at such a young age, before she could experience everything she ever wanted. She truly displayed that she was Gerald's protege in every way. Whatever he was capable of, she would have been capable of doing that and so much more. Maria was an incredibly peculiar, curious, pure, kind-hearted, brave, persistent, empathetic, and highly intelligent person that truly did live up to the Robotnik name. Had she been given a chance in this world, she would have gone on to do great things, just like her grandfather, with Shadow standing right by her side every step of the way. The man that began an entire era single-handedly. I feel like we haven't learned anything about Gerald that we didn't already know. We do learn a bit more about his personal opinions on the work that he did on the Ark, and his struggle to keep up with the constant demands of the government, but we really knew everything we needed to know about Gerald already. He's a kind and gentle person that truly only wanted what was best for his granddaughter and the entire world. He was a man that even respected ancient cultures and questioned if he's even capable of the great things he spent his life working toward. Gerald was unfortunately driven to madness by the very government that enabled all of his scientific adventures. To keep in line with the Robotnik bloodline, he was an extremely intelligent scientist that stopped at nothing in the pursuit to finalize anything he attempted. It's unfortunate that there are no other Robotniks out there attempting to right the wrongs of Dr. Eggman. This entire family is filled with insurmountably brilliant minds that all specialize in something and have perfected at least one entire school of science. He fucking died. Rip, bozo. The story of Shadow Generations is not good. It's simply not. There are so many holes, unanswered questions, and underutilized characters. What's so interesting and capturing about this game is not how it's written. It's purely the ideas being presented, and the fact that the game itself is just really good. It relies on the fact that we already know so much about Shadow. So we know that some of these scenes are actually payoffs that belong to a grander story. The game has scenes needed to fully shut the book on Shadow's past. It's the exact closure that we're looking for. But on the other hand, this game did not have the ability to truly dive into this final arc of Shadow's life. It's very clear that these writers were writing off the assumption that they would be able to tell a full, well-rounded, and complete narrative. This was not the game to tell this story. The story required Shadow's own game, not a DLC attached to another game that already was only allowed to take up minimal space itself. Regardless, there are no more chapters to read in this tale. All that's left is for Shadow to look ahead toward the future. This very first overarching story for Shadow officially has now ended, and a new one must take its place. Going back to Sonic Generations after playing Shadow Generations has given me a god-tier smack of whiplash from how different these two games are, and not just gameplay, but storytelling. It's like a bomb just went off nearby, screeching in my ear that we have completely left the 2010 era of Sonic the Hedgehog and are officially moving on. Even if Shadow Generations squandered a massively important story to Shadow the Hedgehog, it will still go down as one of the greatest Sonic games of all time, as it clearly represents everything we love about this franchise and shows the numerous layers of growth that Sonic Team want to achieve that we have yet to even fully dive into. Sonic and Shadow Generations are two windows. One that shows us all of the flaws that spawned from the 2010 era, displaying how deprived this franchise had become of any semblance of storytelling, and the other window displays the future that this franchise plans to uphold, and it stands as a promise to make that leap and deliver to us time and time again. I'm excited to finally see a fully realized original Sonic story when the next mainline entry is finally announced for all of us to speculate on. We have officially entered the Ian Flynn era of Sonic the Hedgehog. Like, comment, subscribe, follow me on Twitter, join the Eggman Empire Discord, okay, bye!